to go? Live, all right. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order a regular meeting of the Board of Education of Goshen Central School District being held on Tuesday, March 4th, 2025 at 6:30 p.m. in the District Administration Building. After the pledge, I'd like everybody to please join me in a brief moment of silence to remember the passing of the following staff members. Sandra Kramer, a retired secretary at GIS. William Tefectis, a retired social studies teacher at the high school. And Gail Frey, a retired teacher aide and student supervisor at GHS.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Okay, moving on to our President's report. Just want to offer a couple of congratulations to our students. They've been really hard at work. I'm sure they're going to be mentioned a little bit further, but we've had a handful of student athletes proceed on to some statewide competitions. We've had a handful of our Odyssey of the Mind teams also do very well at their competition and proceed forward to states. And another good showing of our musicians at the All County Jazz Music Festival. So great job, students. Keep up all the good work. We're all crushing it. So good job, everyone. All right. Now on to our next item, Board Committee Legislative or Oxford reports. All right, tomorrow's meeting. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Okay, following suit, did everybody have time to read all the policies that are presented tonight? All right, fantastic, very good. All right, and then on to our superintendent's report, Dr. Curtis Coates.
Thank you, Mr. Loftus. I had an opportunity the last 2 days to attend the New York State Council of School Superintendents Conference in Albany. One of the benefits of attending this conference is it affords superintendents from around the state to have interactive time, not only with our legislative leaders, but many times with our New York State Education Department leaders, and this was no exception. The conference culminated this morning with a dialogue with the Commissioner of Education, 2 of her deputies. Large portions of the dialogue focused on, surprisingly, I'm sure it'll catch you all by surprise, cell phone legislation coming up. The field was very clear with the commissioner that we want to have a unified voice to the governor, that we understand that cell phones can be a distraction in the classroom, we understand the problems that they cause, but mechanisms for local communities to be able to articulate what is best for their schools, because many districts have already done a lot of that work, is very important to local school districts. And the commissioner reiterated that she would stand behind local control and continue to work together with the governor in doing so. There's a lot of conversation also on foundation aid and future funding for schools. And while this is really a legislative issue, the state education department had been brought in during the Rockefeller study to be a crucial contributor to that report. One of the pieces that we're hearing repeatedly back as superintendents is this is going to be a process. We know that they've made some minor adjustments to the foundation aid formula for this year. There's a lot of uncertainty coming obviously from the federal level. Will that have any effect on district budgets moving forward? What is the state's fiscal outlook? So the governor has reaffirmed her commitment to try, quote unquote, to get this right moving forward. But we really don't know what the pathway looks like, what the timeline looks like. We do know what they have potentially changed. Our legislature is also committed to 2 pieces within the foundation aid formula. Lower New York, meaning Rockland, Westchester, Putnam, Orange, and Dutchess, has been talking for some period of time about what they refer to as the regional cost index within the foundation aid formula, meaning that essentially it costs more to live here in Lower New York than it does in other parts of the state, and should there be an adjustment for that within the formula, legislative leaders have picked that up. What that means, whether they're going to resolve anything before they adopt a budget, is still left to be seen. There was another conversation regarding that as well on some of the specific carve-outs that can potentially cost districts a lot of money. Special education, there's a large contingency of superintendents that's talking about a unique carve-out for high-cost special education costs, and looking at different ways to mitigate some of the increase in costs that all districts across New York State are experiencing. Probably one of the more frustrating conversations, and this is going to fall more on the legislative side than it will on the policy side with the state education department, is still about the lingering issue of the transition to electric buses. There is acknowledgement that there is a production issue. There's acknowledgement that there is a grid issue. There's acknowledgement all the way around, excuse me, that the timing potentially is just not going to work. However, policymakers on one side think that we have 2.5 years left to get there. Where the way school districts work, if we have to put up a bond referendum, if we have to redo our facilities, there's 24, 36, 48-month lead up sometimes that has to happen. So there's somewhat of a disconnect there. Our legislators have heard loud and clear that this is potentially an issue. We've voiced that again, many superintendents this week. And we're hoping we're gonna get some headway there. They're hearing, they're agreeing, we're just not seeing the action that we need just yet. So there was a lot of good pieces that came out, again, of us being able to interact with and dialogue with all key stakeholders when we're able to attend these conferences together. On the local level, turning to the next item, is our upcoming cell phone meetings. We have agreed to our quote-unquote cell phone summit. We have 3 meetings coming up the end of this month. We have committed to 3 main topics, if you will. We are going to look at a potential policy to recommend to the Board of Education. In doing some preparation for that, I was able to contact the superintendent of the White Plains City School District. They have adopted a policy already. What I appreciated about my conversation with their superintendent, their students played a large role and voice in development of that policy. The students essentially heard the problem from what was coming from the principals, the administrators, the teachers, and they offered some potential solutions on what a good policy would look like. In creating that buy-in, he feels like has created a culture within their schools where the students are going to abide by and benefit from that policy at the same time. So one will be a policy. The second piece would be student engagement. Again, that goes hand in hand with the policy issue. And then finally, we do have some advocacy letters that we hope that part of the group would be willing to work on together to be able to send to our local officials. So we will work on that on our 3 upcoming meetings that we have on the calendar before the end of the month. Finally, we are going to transition to our budget presentation for the evening, and we'll partner with Mrs. Van Pelt-Lamarand. Tonight's budget presentation will heavily focus on revenue, but one thing that we thought was important for tonight was to ensure that we still gave you a comprehensive view of where the budget stands, so that we can continue to dialogue with the board on how to address some of the challenges that we see and still put a well-rounded budget together to put before the community. So I'm gonna let Ms. Van Pelt-Lamarand start from there, and I'm gonna go over and part of it tonight.
Thank you and good evening. Yeah, thanks. Tonight, we're going to be reviewing the revenue section of the budget.
We just go from there.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay, and I just wanted to give you an update of where we are right now. It's still a work in progress on both the expenditure side and the revenue side. Currently, our revenue with the governor's aid numbers is $92,243,046. Our budget projections at this time are $96,903,084 with a budget gap of $4.6 million. Now, this does include the capital project that we talked about of $1.3 million, and the levy cap is calculated at 2.16%. That includes the exclusion for that proposed capital project. And this is the tax cap form. This is due on March 1st, so I filed that on the 28th, last Friday. And again, as I mentioned before, that it includes the proposed capital project. This can be changed up until the point that you adopt the budget, but we did have to get it filed by a certain date to have it in the system. So our proposed revenue, I have broken out up above. The tax levy change is 2.1% or $1.2 million increase. It rounds up to 2.2. Our local sources, this is our pilots, our payment in lieu of taxes. And this actually went down for next year projected by $78,000. And that is due to Amy's Kitchen. We do not have that no longer. There is no progress being made on that construction. So that has been removed from our pilot revenue. Our next section is charges for services. And in here we have Hamptonburg students. Those are placements from other districts that we have to educate here in our district. And these numbers have been declining over the past couple of years. So just to be conservative, I did go with what we have there right now. So if we have 2 students there, say for 24-25, I'm keeping it at that level. Whereas next year we could end up having students move in. It's just too hard to judge what kind of numbers we're going to have. So I wanted to be conservative because you don't want to overestimate your revenue. And that change is a 20% decline because I did take out a number based on this year's numbers. Use of money and property. This is where our interest income is, as well as a few other small items for revenue. And at this time, I wanted to leave this flat. We don't know what the interest rates are going to be for next year. So as we get closer to adoption of the budget, I will keep you informed on this number. We can go up, we can go down, but I figure for now it's safe to leave it flat. Miscellaneous revenue. This is where we put the budget for the library's debt service payments. That's on the expenditure side. This is the revenue side. It's really a wash. We pay the bills. They give us the money to pay the bills, so it's a wash. And typically debt service does go down each year, not by a lot, but that's why there's a small decrease here. And then we have our state aid, and this includes a 2% increase in our foundation aid. And we do expect the One House budget to come out in the next 10 days, so we may see an increase here of $100,000 to $200,000. We're hopeful that we see that. And so this number could change again before we have our next board meeting. And then our appropriated fund balance. I do have the number that we use for 24-25, and that's the $1.2 million number. But we have not determined yet what we will use for the 25-26 school year. That's why you see the question marks and the percentage change and dollar change as being unknown. So I've included, again, we saw this at the last board meeting. This is some district-wide efficiencies that we've done over the past few years, and it's just a reminder of what we've looked at. If you have any questions, you can certainly bring those up as well. I'm not gonna go through them again. Next, we have our projected enrollment. And this is an overall reduction over the past 5 to 6 years of 160 students, which you can see is actually almost the same number as our incoming grade level. Back in 23-24, we had 161 students entering kindergarten. Although that number did go up a little this year, The projection for next year right now is just that, a projection based on the 5-year experience. So we do not know what that number will be yet. Because our incoming levels are smaller, we also need to right-size our budget to reflect these changes. And that's something we hope to do in this budget or over the next 2 years' budget.
Yep. Okay. So as Ms. Van Pelt pointed out, we are still watching several moving parts in the budget. As she pointed out, the legislature is expected within the next 10 days to 2 weeks to release their one-house budget. Just to keep in mind, we do have a uniquely democratically controlled legislature right now, so they don't even have to resolve their budget. They, instead of the assembly putting out one budget, the Senate putting out another, they come together before they release a budget proposal, which is different than it's been in the past. It's happened that way only the last few years. To release one proposal, that they only have to reconcile that one with the executive branch before adopting a budget. We're hopeful that's going to come out in the next 10 days. Repeatedly, many of our legislators have articulated that they have said that the governor's budget is a starting point. So as Mrs. Lamourin pointed out, we could see some increase in foundation aid. Right now, we can't count on that. We're hopeful we might see something, and any little bit is going to help us to balance the budget. What is in front of you now is really where the conversations need to start to come together, if you will. We've tried to put a menu of broad options together for you for consideration on how we can balance the budget before we put something out to the voters. We have not designated any one category as the main target point. Obviously, we have gone through extensively together looking for places where we could make reductions. We've had conversations on what a tax cap override would look like, appropriation of fund balance, appropriation of reserves. All of this now has to be balanced out because the last slide that we're going to finish with here is really the mission statement of the district. And one of the things that we talk about regularly is how do we balance ensuring that when this budget goes before the community, and it's a responsibly proposed budget, that we can still ensure that we're producing a high quality education for all students in the district and they're getting the services that they need. It's part of the fiscal cycle. We've had a few good years. This is going to be a challenging year, but we're trying to roll up our sleeves to make sure that the decisions that we make here still ensure that we can preserve that high quality education. So I'm going to turn it back to Mrs. Van Pelt now to get in the weeds a little bit on some of what this may look like, some of what the decisions may look like. But again, this menu of options, without reading through each one specifically, is exactly that. You could go all to one side, you could go all to the other, or you could pick really from a menu of everything to be able to balance this budget. But to really jumpstart that conversation, I'm going to turn it back to Ms. Van Pelt and she's going to start to explain what some of that looks like and what the implication of some of this could be.
Thank you, Dr. Coates. I wanted to share with you some history of our fund balance and our reserves, where we were and where we are now. And I know it looks like a bunch of numbers up there. It's a little overwhelming at first, but the first two columns or the first two rows are our unappropriated fund balance and our appropriated fund balance and reserves, if we were going to appropriate reserves. And then we have all of our reserve funds. And in 2021, we had $5 million, and that's where I'm focusing now, just because you can see a zero in the following year. That's when we had $5 million in our capital reserve, and we were able to do an HVAC and a roof project at Scotchtown with the federal ESSER funds and ESSER 2 funds, in addition to using initially our savings account for our capital projects. And then as we move across, our fund balance goes up and down and it trends up going across. And we were able to put funds in the reserves, and reserves are used, as they say, for rainy days. So if things are needed, if you have a furnace that goes or something unexpectedly, these funds are there for you to use in order to make those emergency repairs. They're also for good planning, for your 5-year planning. So we do want to do a larger capital project in the next few years. And we've been trying to put money aside for that purpose. And that's why our capital reserve is now at $2.5 million. And I just wanted to show you an example of our projected 25-26 changes. So if we were to appropriate 2.5 million, again, that's just an example number, what would it show moving forward? So we do decline on our reserves, however, you can see our increase in the appropriated reserves, or I'm sorry, in appropriating fund balance and reserves does go up. And where we're getting that number from, if we were to use it, is from our tax surcharge reserve, which we did talk about having some funds in there to use moving forward for capital projects. And then I also wanted to note that we did not move the money yet, but in the event that we need more money for the employee benefit payouts in the budget, I did reduce that line item in the budget when I presented the expenditure side. And that's because we do have money in the employee benefit reserve, the $2.1 million. So if we needed more, the board could move to have it taken out of there to support paying it out. So I just wanted to explain how that works and to see if anybody has any questions. Okay. And then moving forward, this is what it could look like if we were to use reserves each of the next few years, not just in 25-26, but also 26-27 and 27-28. And that's without any other changes, with no reductions in your budget, no increases to the levy. If everything stayed stagnant, this is what could happen. So again, your reserves are for rainy day funds. And if you needed to use them to support your budget moving forward, they do go down because essentially you can't put them back because it is difficult unless you have any extra revenue come in, or if you underspend your budget, which we try to do every year. Typically budgets are spent up to 98% are spent and encumbered. We can try to reduce that as well moving forward. But this is what would happen once we start dipping into the reserves and what it would look like and the aggregate dollar change as you move forward. And I know that's a large number, but we don't want to go down this trail, so to speak, because it creates a funding gap, and it also creates a funding cliff. And once the money is gone, it's gone. So, and good fiscal planning is to not, you want to use a little bit here and there, but not to balance your budget. Any questions? And again, this is just an example to look at. So next I wanted to put our contingency budget numbers up there. So if the budget were not to pass the first time out, the board does have a choice to either adopt the contingency budget right away or put it back up for another vote and try to get it to pass. And if it doesn't pass the second time, you do have to approve a contingency budget. Under a contingency budget, you have to maintain the same tax levy as you did for the current year. And that number is $55.6 million. And that is another $1.2 million that we would need to balance the budget. And if you take the $4 million gap that I showed you on the second slide and add it this $1.2 million, our total gap would become $5.8 million. So it just grows. And in addition to that, there's certain expenditures you cannot have in your budget, such as equipment purchases, field trips, and the capital project could not go forward. That's not something we could do. And then the community use of facilities, we can avoid fees. We would have to charge for that. And certain cuts, as I mentioned up there, cannot be made because such as textbooks and supplies for students and transportation, those are required to be used in that. Any questions on that? And then I just end, as I usually do, with the mission statement and our contact information. If anybody had any questions. And
I just have a question. So for the appropriated fund balance, do we have, what is the percentage for our budget and what is the comptroller state? What we should have or what neighboring?
So what we should have in unappropriated fund balance is 4% of our budget, and that's the current budget, and our current budget is $91 million. So the 4% is that number. Sorry, if you don't mind going back to slide 8, that number, the 4.2 million is the 4%.
That's
And
4% exactly, is that what we're
Give or
tending to
take
do,
a
because it's been growing, or is that just, like, it fluctuates, so?
it fluctuates, so you always wanna try to keep it at 4%, which last year we didn't move the money before the end of the year, but we also want to fully fund your reserves. And because we didn't do it in June, we did it in the summer, I believe, July or August. We moved the money out of the unappropriated into the capital reserve, the 2.5 million there. On the 24-25, I'm sorry, 2.5 million, I'm looking at the one above. So you typically don't wanna have over 4% in the fund balance.
And then the only other question I have, we brought it up several different times, forgive me if there was like a clear answer that I'm just not remembering, but Medicaid billing for PPS, we're trying to obviously scrimp and do whatever we can to
We are,
affect.
so I'm still waiting for an answer on that, actually. I did more digging. I found that we have 4 students that are eligible, but I do not know what the services include and how much that would come to as a reimbursement. I sent the information on these students. Some do have services and some don't, so it's very minimal. Up to, I think I talked about state aid planning that we're using for our staff service. They're also going to be doing Medicaid billing for schools next year, starting in July. So I asked them if they could help me calculate the amount, because honestly, I don't know where to begin. I don't have the rates and whatnot, and they have access to that. So they are working on that for us. But if I were to guesstimate, I would say it's definitely under $100,000.
Okay,
So
is there a reason why we're waiting for the estimate versus just, I mean, if there's money sitting on the table somewhere, why are we not?
So there's a lot involved with that. We have to get the parents' approval first. And then we have to start the billing process. They aren't starting until July. And I don't know who we used in the past because it's like 10 years ago or more since the district did bill. Because the number of students did go down. When I did my research, I found that the number of students steadily declined that would receive Medicaid benefits. So that number could grow, it could decline again. It's pretty big range, so.
So we're waiting for that to get back at this point to hear, and then the next steps, are you waiting for a cost analysis on that?
Correct. Well, once I have the numbers, then we have to figure out how long it takes because cost analysis is high in order to do this. And I have to find out how much they charge as well, on top of manpower in the district as well. So when you have 4 students, I don't even know if it'll reach $100,000.
All right, thank you.
I just wanted to ask, we talked previously about how the buildings departments had asked for additional staffing, but we were waiting, the board had requested justification for, what was needed, even though now we're so obviously at a deficit and there's talk about, staff reductions. I still want to see what the justification, so we can talk about what the students need. I'm not sure where we are with that.
That had all been sent out to the board, I think 2 weeks ago. I had emailed it out during a weekly update directly what the principals and directors had sent me. I did
A lot
email
of
it.
it was narrative though,
Yeah.
but there was data attached to it.
Anything that they sent to me, I sent directly to the
Okay,
board.
all right, I'll go through it again, thank you.
So in the beginning of the presentation, we talked about a menu, if you will, on areas where we can start moving. So now I guess we're kind of getting to that point where we have to start making some decisions as to which direction we're gonna head to really propose things. I guess I'm glad really you started digging into this very early. I think just to offer some initial thought for myself personally is I don't necessarily love the idea of using one category to solve the deficit. I kind of like a more balanced approach. If that's a little bit of a tax levy increase, a little bit from fund balance, a little bit from reserves. I think if we go too focused on one area to try to make up the difference, then we're gonna be at a loss somewhere, right? If we don't handle the tax levy, we have problems in a few years out. We need to continue to improve the buildings. We want to try and maintain as many of the services as we can. So I think moving forward, one of my, thoughts is that let's see how maybe in each of the areas we can do a little bit to try to get it there. And it did seem like that between the last presentation and this one, I think we were over 5 million in the gap, and now we've narrowed down a little bit more.
Right, and that is
4.6.
due to ups and downs on both sides, but basically it is coming from the capital project with the capital exclusion included in the levy cap calculation.
I understand this a little bit premature, but just because it is one of the things on their staff reductions, which no one wants that. I understand that, but if there's something that we could look at for maybe cost analysis on buyout, to see if that would be advantageous to us to look at that versus the other side of it, of laying people off. To see what that would look like and where that would be an advantage to us, if any.
So just, if I can hop in just for a second. Just as an aside, and please don't take this as advocacy in any one shape or form. A lot of conversation that I heard around the table for the first time, especially from some of the districts in the wealthy areas that are not seeing large increases in foundation aid, are conversations around the tax gap. Districts, I've heard conversations on budget gaps umpteen times over the last 2 days. And if it's not this year, districts are really being faced with, are they going to have to go out with a budget where they pierce the cap? Because the issue is they're looking at health insurance increases, they're looking at the transportation mandate. And I had a conversation with a colleague on Long Island, even in anticipation of the transportation mandate, they're seeing increases in their contract renewals of 20 to 30% already. And they're quite honestly looking at the state saying there's no way we can cover these costs and still stay within the cap. And I know the conversations come up at the table. Well, yes, 6.9% would be fully rollover. It would allow us to just fund the budget next year. You could even look at a lower iteration of that with any combination. So again, I'm not advocating to pierce the cap, but you do have the option if you do want to go over the 2.16%. Of partially going over, if you will, while still making reductions in other areas, appropriating fewer reserves, and why that gives you a feathered option if that's what you choose. If we get to the point where we do have to make reductions, it allows you to balance the budget and get some symmetry back into the budget where you wouldn't be faced with this in the out years as well. Because your expenditures would start to fall where your revenue would be a little bit more steady.
At one point in time, I think you had shared a slide showing what the historic tax levy cap increase was. If you don't mind, maybe we can pull that up again. I know right now we probably don't have access to it, but I think that would be helpful to circulate around even before the next meeting to the board, so we can look at that again. If I recall, there were some higher increases, and we had a handful of years during those COVID years, especially where there was no increase whatsoever.
And sorry.
No, good.
To keep in mind, those years during COVID were years where we saw the foundation aid formula fully funded again. The district was running, was it just under 60%? Yeah, I think it was right around 60% of what we were entitled to. So they did a 3-year phase in for full funding of the foundation aid. So if you look at our revenue source and the increases that we saw in those years, it was astronomical. It was easy to balance the budget those years. Now we're hitting that balance point, and because we kept the tax levy low during those years, there's no other way to say it. We left revenue on the table. We did the calculation. We left probably over the last 4 years about $4.6 million in tax revenue on the table, and that it's caught up with us. And there's times I'm going to use the words that Ms. Van Poeleren used earlier. Is we have to right size now. We have to right size the budget, and we have to get caught up.
No, thank you for the comment. I mean, I'll be honest with you, some of this, it's like a learning experiment as you go. This is, do my own taxes, but this kind of gets into the level where you're trying to figure it out. And we want to make sure that we don't get upside down, but at the same time, to kind of grow with how we are. So even with what Shannon had said, that our needs are changing, obviously our population, our students are changing. So we can't just continue to spend. I think we have to evolve and do both. We're gonna have to make some cuts, but some evolving cuts, or maybe some add-ons and some cuts in places, and do both. I think we kind of have to go from both sides.
And it's hard. We often forget as a public entity, we can't put a lemonade stand up front. The only thing we can do to raise revenue is through taxes, and it's complicated. It's very, very complicated.
Again, thank you, because some of the specifics that have been shared via email and in the meetings, things like just looking at some of the smaller items like the softwares that we use, or maybe a subscription, where those things are adding up. I definitely appreciate that feedback. One of the items that I had brought up at the last meeting were areas that maybe are aidable, that we're not necessarily getting an aid in yet. There might be just a few line items. How many are there? Are there opportunities for us? Maybe that doesn't impact the budget, but moving forward at the end of this year, if there are contracts with vendors or other services that we have that maybe aren't aidable, that could be. How many are there? Are there a dozen? Are there 3? What do those line items look like? And if we can consider where the contracts stand with those vendors, suppliers, services, moving into the next school year, maybe an analysis of that might shed some light as well.
Yeah, submit. Submit. Mr. Rediker and Mr. Starrett are excellent about any time that we can buy a software program through BOCES. We do. Sometimes you have to look at the upcharge at what a specific program is going to add on. It just, the dollars and cents don't equal. However, we do see a great benefit often with software with going through BOCES. One of the struggles that we're having right now, we've worked very hard with Dr. Hendershot, looking specifically at, because you've seen it in the numbers, our special education needs in the district are skyrocketing. In doing that, we're trying to make good decisions on when the CSE makes a determination on a placement for a student, that we can assist it and fund that placement, whether it's in BOCES or a private placement, or is there an opportunity to house that program here in district? When you make decisions to bring those programs back to district again, while there's an upfront savings of the cost of sending a student to a BOCES program, Ms. always reminds me, you lose the aid on the back end at the same time. So you have to really dig into what kind of overall savings are you getting. And I use that only as one example. Transportation was another one that we did a big analysis on, and that was huge. And transportation is kind of a carve out right now because the costs are just, as we talked a moment ago, they're skyrocketing. But there are the abilities to look at all components of our expenditures to see where we can make savings going to a BOCES for a consortium buy. And we did it with our capital project too. When we bought the HVAC equipment, we went to an Omnia bid and we were able to capitalize on that and get the work done very quickly.
Has there been any conversations more in the last that you were just at with shared services, or thoughts of saving any money that way?
We haven't discussed it at my level. I have a business officials meeting coming up Friday. Certainly bring that up and see. We talked about possibly helping with other districts, hosting them in our special ed classes or
Except-
offering.
accepting tuition students, if we wanted to look at that. And I brought that up at the superintendent's meeting as well.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, great, very good. All right, Ms. Van Lambert, do you have any additional items to report this evening?
Not.
No, okay. So we'll move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, Personnel and Technology report, Mr. Jason Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Loftus. Good evening, everyone. So I'd like to take a few moments just to recognize many of our students who have been doing wonderful things, especially throughout this past weekend. And also talk a little bit about those that supervise the students who are putting in a large amount of time for that purpose. So as you had mentioned earlier, we had a great opportunity to send 9 teams to Orange Ulster BOCES to compete in the regional OM competition. Very proud to say that we had multiple teams place. So we had 3 first place finishers. We had 2 teams finish second place. And we actually had 2 third place finishers as well. So we were extremely successful over at OU BOCES. I would like to just quickly read through the teams and coach name just to offer proper recognition. So first place, Goshen Intermediate School, Team Fixon. First place, CJ Hooker Middle School, Team Schmidt. First place, Goshen High School, Team Seligman. Second place, CJ Hooker, Team O'Reilly and Avila Ruiz. Second place finisher, CJ Hooker, Team Losi. And our third place finishing teams, GIS Team Borden and Hoffman, and also GIS Team Losi. So as you can see, very successful weekend. Our next step is to move on to the state finals in Syracuse. So we'll have a nice send off for those students on April 5th. And hopefully we'll bring home some state titles and move on to Worlds. I will work with Mr. Pasante so that we get a proper release for our website. And maybe to go should need to recognize our students and coaches. And again, we just want to thank our participants and especially the coaches. So I've said it every time we've had the opportunity to speak about OM. The students put in a very large amount of time. They're extremely dedicated. It isn't something that takes just 6 weeks or even 10 weeks to prepare for. It starts very early, and they meet very often. Most importantly, we have some really wonderful volunteers, some adults throughout the community and within our buildings that dedicate an awful lot of time to prepare our students for these competitions. So we're very grateful for that. I just want to say thank you, congratulations, and let's move on to states. We also had Jazz All County Music Festival. So Friday and Saturday, we had an opportunity to send some of our students over to the high school in Tuxedo to take part in a concert. We actually had 21 students combined, high school and middle school, and this just so happened to be the most in the county. So we were very well represented there. And this is also something to really take notice of because our students have to not only prepare a piece, but also audition in front of a very large panel. And this was done in November. I know that we had mentioned it. The concert was a success. Our students did very well. We had 4 students from CJ Hooker. We had 17 from the high school. And again, we just want to thank our students for preparing, for performing well, for representing us well. And also we want to say thank you to our entire music department, especially Ms. Longo, Mrs. Scully, and Mr. Hackett. And then something that we were supposed to have toward the end of February that was rescheduled for May 5th. We plan to attend the numeracy briefs at OU BOCES, but this will be an overview of the numeracy briefs, and it will be statewide. So most likely Dr. Coates and I will begin with attending and just getting eyes on what the briefs will become in planning for proper implementation throughout the district. This is much like the literacy briefs that we had attended, last school year toward the end of the school year there. And so this will be put on not only by the state and all of the larger components within the state, but also Dr. Ball from the University of Michigan, who is the former Dean of Education and also a current professor. And the focus will be on the best research-based instructional practices in the area of mathematics, which we can then put in hopefully P12. Have a lot of great professional development around that, and we look forward to the opportunity. So we'll start in May, and then start to attend the briefs as they come out in the time. And that will conclude my report this evening. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Carter. Moving on. Need a motion to approve the consent agenda. Shannon, Ashley. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education approves the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Need a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting. John and Scott. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education approves the minutes of the February 18th, 2025 regular meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Need a motion to accept the recommendations of the Committee of Special Education and Committee on Preschool Special Education. Beth, Ashley, and Brett. Be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby arranges for the special education programs and services based upon the recommendations made for preschool and school-age students with disabilities by the Committee on Preschool Special Education, CPSE, and Committee on Special Education, CSE, during the period January 14, 2025 through and including February 18, 2025, and directs the district to arrange for the provisions of said special education program and services to such preschool and school-age students with disabilities as recommended during such time period by the CPSE and CSE. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Need a motion to approve the overnight trip for Olympics of the Visual Arts trip to Saratoga Springs. We have Shannon and Scott. Be resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education approves the Olympics of the Visual Arts trip to Saratoga Springs, New York from March 31st through April 1st, 2025. Be it further resolved that the Board of Education reserves the right to cancel or reschedule any school-sponsored trip or activity in the event of any emergency condition outside of the control of the school district in its sole discretion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Need a motion to approve the 12-month employee holiday calendar for 2025-2026. John and Ashley. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education approves the 12-month employee holiday calendar for the 2025-2026 school year as presented. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Need a motion to accept donations and authorize increase to the budget. We have Brett and Scott. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education accepts the following donations from the Scotchtown Avenue Elementary School PTO. For the Hudson Highlands Nature Center Assemblies, $2,479.58. The Prismatic Assembly, $1,433.13. Be it further resolved, the Board of Education approves the increase to the 2024-2025 budget to support the associated expenditures as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. All right, do we have any board member issues, comments, concerns? No, all right, very good. Thank you. And I need a motion for executive session. We have John, Brett. Be it resolved, the Board of Education will enter into executive session with the intent not to reconvene the business portion of the meeting for discussions related to the employment history of a particular person or persons and the educational history of particular students. All those in favor? Opposed? All right, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great night.